And I remember my dad pulling me aside after listening to Clifford Brown, who was still alive and playing around Philadelphia, and he had bought Clifford and Mac's record, I forget which one, and Clifford was playing a ballad, and he was emotionally overcome, and he literally grabbed my arm and said, "Randy, trumpet's the greatest jazz instrument." And I remember that sound took hold, so that might have been the moment that I kind of decided to play the trumpet, because my father loved trumpet players. They had loved Dizzy, and I started playing along with Miles and Shorty Rogers and Clifford playing ballads. So that I remember clearly, but music was really always around the house, so there wasn't an exact moment. I just kind of grew up with it and was kind of predestined. When I was 2 weeks old, and I had my dad come and record this shortly before he passed away, he wrote a song for me when I was 2 weeks old called "The Hottest Man in Town," and it described that I was going to play a horn and be a musician. 2 weeks old, so I think I was predestined in that respect. When I was 15, my father took me to, and this club I remember really clearly, because this was the first time I sat in with anyone who was professional. It was a club called the Proscenium, which was on Chestnut or Walnut around 17th Street. I think it was Chestnut, and it was a wonderful alto player by the name of Clarence C. Sharp who played there, and he was nice enough to let me sit in as a 15-year-old, and I was basically really just playing by ear, but he liked what I did and was very encouraging, so he only played once or twice a week during the week, but he let me come by when I turned 16 and I had a car, I could drive in, and he let me sit in whenever I chose to. So I think that the fact that I was a young white kid from the suburbs, I think that was kind of made it somewhat of a novelty. And these like I've said in previous interviews, just the African American community in Philadelphia just kind of took me under their wing, and I met all these amazing guys, and it's just something you just can't either describe or you can't describe how much the influence had on me. It was far beyond music. In the summer of '66, I went to Europe and just kind of like as a kid bummed around and did the same thing I was trying to do in Philadelphia, sit in with people and play with whomever I could. And the culmination of that summer was a contest in Vienna where just scores and scores of musicians, mostly from Europe, attended. The judges were, there was one judge on every instrument. Art Farmer, J.J. Johnson, Cannonball Adderley, Joe Zawinul, Ron Carter, Mel Lewis, and the gentleman who kind of put the whole thing together, whose name was Friedrich Gulde. So number one, we got to meet all these guys. You know, I was up in Cannonball Adderley's room with Mel Lewis when he had just recorded the first Mel Lewis, Thad Jones Mel Lewis big band. He wanted to play it for Cannonball, and they had also taken to what I played, so I was kind of tagging along. So imagine that I was probably like 18 years old, 17 years old. Anyway, I also met at this contest a lot of other great young musicians. We were all teenagers or maybe barely out of our teens. People like Jan Hammer, who went on to play with Mahavishnu Orchestra. I'll just mention some of the names. When you think back, it's pretty amazing. George Mraz, Miroslav, Jan Hammer, Eddie Daniels, Franco Ambrosetti, Joachim Kuhn, Tomasz Stanko, Claudio Roditi. We were all in a youth hostel together. So it made it easier when we moved to New York, because a lot of us moved around the same time. We kind of helped each other out. And playing jam sessions a lot with Miroslav, and George came a couple years later, but kind of through the grapevine and having known Mel Lewis from this contest, I got my name out a little easier. And when I moved to New York after that summer in '66, I finished up my studies at New York University. And I was invited to join Mel and Thad's band. I joined the Duke Pearson Big Band, and it was easier, for lack of a better word back then, it was easier to network. And it was still a novelty because I was young and had moved to town. And that eventually led to my auditioning with Horace Silver, who heard about me through this smaller grapevine. And eventually I got the gig, and I left Blood, Sweat and Tears right before they recorded Spinning Wheel. And spent a year and a half with Horace, and it was just, I still model my own leadership abilities as a band leader after the way he modeled himself as a band leader. And just ideas like writing my own material and how to present the material, and keeping an eye and ear open in other countries for sounds that I might enjoy or experiences, and working those experiences into my music, I all got from Horace. I've been in New York since 1966. I'm 45, I don't know, do the math, odd years, but it still feels like I'm from Philly. Whenever I go home, it's still home. After all these years, it's something it's another thing you can't quite put into words, but it really does feel like home whenever I go there.